Hello, and welcome to Classroom Management for the Adult Learner. This is Leisha Barnes. I'm the Academic Development Manager for Milady, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and let's just get started. Classroom management for the adult learner is a skill that is not only learned, but we have to practice it daily. Motivational factors influence the class as a whole, and those are both positively and negatively influencing our classroom. Often the level of motivation that our students possess while they're in school is going to have a direct effect on the level of management that we as educators need in order to be able to control and direct our classrooms on a daily basis. The responsibility of creating a positive classroom environment challenges us as the educator to use our skills as a leader, as a teacher, supervisors, managers, advisors, disciplinarians, and student advocates. We have a whole lot of hats that we have to wear every time we step into a classroom. So today's webinar, we're going to look at discovering how to balance our roles effectively to ensure that students maintain high levels of motivation and interest in an effort to minimize disciplinary challenges in the classroom. So our objectives for the call, we're going to describe internal and external motivating factors that is going to affect the adult learner. We'll look at some techniques that we can use to increase student motivation levels. We'll talk about implementing activities and procedures that contribute to a favorable learning environment and techniques to deal with some problematic student situations that we all run into in the class from time to time. So let's get started. We've all heard the age-old debate, can we motivate others, or is motivation internal? Is it something that we have to choose to do ourselves, or can we motivate somebody else? It's a great question. It's a great debate. And to be honest, it's both. Adult learners are both motivated by both intrinsic, basically within themselves, and extrinsic factors, basically from the environment that they are in. Being aware of both elements can help you motivate your students towards success in the classroom. Your response to a student's attitude, your sensitivity to their self-esteem and their self-concept, as well as the way you structure the environment, can have a significant impact on the student's educational experiences. Adult learners are going to be more concerned with and focused on meeting their basic needs, such as caring for their families and maintaining employment, and school may become a secondary consideration if those basic needs are not first met. So that's something that we have to be aware of. General principles of motivation must be tailored to the specific circumstances of the individual student. That's another really big key there, is that it's not one size fits all. We have to tailor our motivation to the different individual students based on their diverse needs, their interest, experiences of the adult learner, and it all requires a different approach to motivation. But there are techniques and approaches that we can apply to motivate the adult learner. These techniques include the classroom approaches as well as techniques that we use in our daily interaction with our students. Many, such as positive feedback, take little or no extra time at all. So let's begin by looking at some of those intrinsic factors that I was talking about with our students. There's several that is going to motivate them from an internal process. Individuals may be more or less motivated depending on how they view themselves, how they feel about themselves, and the degree of control they feel over circumstances. Although perhaps not motivational in themselves, these factors affect how the individual responds to individual motivational elements. So let's start with self-concept. Self-concept is the way a person views themselves. Well, a lot of times we'll say self-esteem, and that's the way a person feels about themselves. They're either happy or unhappy with themselves. Self-concept includes the belief that an individual has about themselves, and it encompasses a number of components. For example, any student has certain beliefs about their personal abilities. Some, hey, I can do this, or something, hey, I can't do this. That's a self-concept. A student who thinks poorly of themselves because of a lack of ability is considered to have a low self-esteem. If a student says, I don't do some things well, so that's okay because I do other things well, they're viewed as having maybe a higher self-esteem and recognizing their limitations. A student's self-concept can be influenced by many things. including the level of their self-esteem, their attitude toward themselves, their values, their relationships, their sense of personal importance, and their previous experiences. A student's self-concept changes with new experiences and new relationships. So a student whose self-concept is positive may begin to have doubts about their ability in a new environment or when they first come to the school. Conversely, a student who has had self-doubts about viewing school as an accomplishment of which to be proud, thus this will boost their self-concept and their self-esteem as well. An individual's self-concept can influence the way new situations are perceived. Students with a positive self-concept, that I can do it attitude, may be more motivated by newer situations such as enrolling in school or a new class. They may perceive themselves as capable and successful and may take the initiative to seek out additional education, additional classes, completing assignments on time or volunteering for extra work. Students with a negative self-concept may see themselves as less successful and be less likely to get involved. So when we think about our students, if somebody tends to sit back and not want to do things, it may not have anything to do with us. It may have a lot to do with their self-concept in that they're not motivated to do that. Internal and external locus of control. Now, a locus of control refers to the way in which an individual perceives the control over a situation in their lives. People with an internal locus believe they control a large part of what happens to them. Individuals with an external locus of control tend to see themselves at the mercy of the circumstances around them and as having little control over what happens. They believe oftentimes that its positive or negative experiences are a result of their own efforts. That's the internal. Or if somebody believes the experience happened due to luck, that's the external locus of control. A student attitude is another motivational factor that we must consider. Each student enters the classroom with a different learner attitude based on his or her past learning experiences and their past life experiences. We are teaching adults. Most of us are. I recognize some of us are in high school programs, but for the most part, we are teaching adult learners, and they come to us with a great deal of baggage already in place. Students quickly will assess the instructor, they will quickly assess the subject matter and the environment, and they will make judgments based on their past experiences and other educational situations that they have been in. These judgments that adult learners make can be quite strong and very difficult to change once they are established, and therefore the student's attitude is going to have a major influence on how motivated they are throughout the course. A student who makes a quick negative assessment will be less likely to strive and achieve things, while a student may challenge the instructor. They may complain about unfair treatment. I know none of us have that. And they assume the class will be boring. Conversely, a student who makes a positive assessment is likely to have a more engaging and willing attitude and may stay after class to ask more questions, offer ideas, and even act as a cheerleader for the rest of the class and other projects. So keep in mind what we're talking about here are the intrinsic, the internal motivational factors. We're just recognizing some of the different factors that motivate students from an internal perspective. I got a couple more to look at. Student needs. Each student comes to the class with a different set of needs. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist who categorized people's needs from the basic to the complex. Basically what he said is that the more basic the individual's survival necessities, such as food, shelter, having a roof over their head, while they then progress to more complex needs, Maslow actually calls that self-actualization. It includes goal achievement and a deep understanding of self. So somewhere between basic survival needs and self-actualization are the needs such as belonging to social groups and having esteem. And according to Maslow, this is a hierarchy. There are steps that we go through. So if an individual is not satisfied with their basic needs, they are going to have a very hard time being concerned with the higher needs. such as their education. If they're trying to figure out how to pay their rent or their daycare situations, they are going to have a very difficult time getting motivated and excited about school, and that's where some of this breakdown occurs. Self-Efficacy, this is basically students are motivated by how competent they feel. It refers to the student's perception of his or her own level of competence. Students who have experienced success and mastery in other areas of their life will generally feel competent and able in your class. On the other hand, if a student has come in and they've not had a lot of success in their life before, they might struggle with finding some sense of mastery within the program that we're teaching. And then there's personal relevance, adult learners who are concerned with how relevant or applicable the class is to their lives. If they can't make the connection to how this impacts their life and their future, it's going to be a hard thing for them to get motivated. So that's the intrinsic. Let's look at the extrinsic for just a minute.
The conference is now in silent mode.
Extrinsic motivational factors are those elements in the external environment that influence an individual's level of motivation. For some people, material rewards increase motivation levels. For others, just a good challenge is the same as other types of rewards. So we've got a list here that I want to quickly talk about. First of all, you will hear me say it in any class I teach, and you've probably heard it on every one of these conference calls, positive reinforcement. Students who receive positive reinforcement from the educator or from other students, from their peers, are more likely to get motivated. The positive reinforcement can come in the form of praise, positive attention, body language, good grades. Positive reinforcement can have a significant effect on motivation. Providing students with sincere feedback, even on the small accomplishments, can increase their feelings of self-esteem and self-competence. There is usually something good that can be said in any performance. It takes no extra time to make a positive statement. Before talking to them about what they need to improve, point out what they did right in a situation. I guarantee if you will start doing that, just focusing on the positive, what they did well, that will shift so many of our students' attitudes. For those of you who have attended any of the Master Educator classes that we teach, you'll hear us say quite often, what gets praised and rewarded gets repeated. So when we focus on the positive, we will find the student will repeat that behavior. Another motivational factor is the amount of challenge. Every student's level of motivation will be directly affected by how challenged they are. Because ability levels may vary considerably in a class of adult learners, the amount of challenges offered usually needs to be very individualized. Now, this is where it gets really tricky for an instructor because, you have a class of 30 people, and they're all at different levels, and yes, we have to find ways to meet the needs of all of those students. Students who are challenged too little may be bored and unmotivated. Students who are overly challenged are likely to feel discouraged and overwhelmed. Both of these affect motivation. For each student, the just right challenge is needed, meaning that every student will feel enough interest to persist, yet also feel successful in their attempts. We don't want to make it so difficult that they can't achieve, but so easy that some of them are getting bored. Success at the appropriate challenging task is a form of positive reinforcement. Expectations need to be high enough to encourage students to grow, but realistic enough to allow successes. The amount of stimulation, something about the class environment must offer an appropriate amount of stimulation. Stimulation is what's going to hold our students' interest throughout our class, and it might be provided by the instructor through their presentation styles. The way you deliver a class is going to vary the stimuli for the student, their interest in a subject matter, overall student participation, and, of course, the level of fun. The more fun we make it, the greater the stimulation there will be. Adult learners are busy people and are more prone to distraction and fatigue. So if the class does not hold their interest or if it's overstimulating, it can go both ways. If it's perceived as too much information in a short period of time, a student's motivation level may drop considerably. Students who are appropriately stimulated are more alert. They maintain eye contact. They participate in classroom discussions, and they share information in logical and coherent fashions. We need to also provide empathy and support to help motivate our students. Now, this is a very fine line that educators have to walk, meaning we show empathy and support for our students in many ways, but we have to be very careful that we are not their friend. It's not a fraternization thing. It's not getting involved in their lives. It's being empathetic and understanding where they are. The way in which empathy and support are demonstrated is going to, again, vary based on the individual needs of our students. Feeling that their needs are understood and that we are willing to support them in meeting those needs can be very motivational to the student in their classroom. Helping students identify their needs, which includes discussions, helping them set priorities, helping them problem solve, are all going to go a long way depending on the student. Now, I think the best advice I can give you is your goal is to be empathetic and understanding in relationship to their education. It's not to get involved in their personal lives. You need to be aware of what's going on in their personal lives, but it's not your role to solve that or to fix that for them. It is a matter of being empathetic and understanding where their educational problems are. The instructor's willingness to accommodate students' needs and support them in meeting numerous obligations can be a powerful motivator. Opportunity for professional advancement. Adult learners often are doing a career change midlife. They're seeking education to pursue this goal. Be aware of information and resources that will motivate the student who are in school for professional advancement. Show them what else is possible. Let them recognize that there is so much more to our industry than standing behind a chair or at a nail table or behind a facial bed. There is so much more that is possible. So teach them about opportunities for professional advancement, such as what you guys are all doing. You all sought another path beyond the initial license. So that is motivational to our students, getting them to understand that there are so many different things that we can do within this industry. And then, of course, our instructor characteristics. Although different students are going to respond to different instructor characteristics, there are certain traits that are recognized as contributing to student motivation. So let's take a look at characteristics of educators who are motivational, who motivate. First of all, offer expertise. The students view you as the expert in your field. So the motivating educator is an expert in the content area, and they're capable of providing information to students in an understandable way so that they can apply it to their learning. I think this is the biggest thing for us as educators to remember is that these students are coming to us, and they may know a few things, because we live in a society of information, and they have access to information. But you're still the expert, and things that you've been doing for years that are so natural, they may not know. And so we need to teach them how to do all of this and recognize that you are the expert. At the same time, the motivating educator is not a know-it-all and remains open to new ideas based on the students' experiences. Again, because students have access to such amazing information through the Internet and shows that they can go to, they can oftentimes bring new information to us that we may not be aware of. So the motivating educator is one who is going to be open to that and recognize that there are other ways of doing things and not just be it's my way all the time. So the educator that shares their own experiences as appropriate and researches new ideas and information for the class when necessary is really going to help motivate the students. In addition, the motivating educator is very well prepared, organized, timely, yet remains flexible enough to meet the demands and the needs of the classroom. The motivating educator is one who demonstrates empathy. Now, we talked about this one already, so just quickly, we have to take individual situations into consideration and work with students to accommodate their needs within reasonable limits. Again, I'm talking about educational needs here, but demonstrating empathy for individual needs maybe altering an assignment or working within their learning style a little bit more effectively. Now, you have to do this always within your school's policies, but be empathetic and look at other ways that you can help them get the information. Of course, we have to demonstrate enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is visible energy. It is being enthusiastic by demonstrating your passion for the subject, being an active participant in your field, making strong connections with the student, being a strong investment in teaching, showing them your excitement and your passion. And honestly, if you are at the point where you're no longer passionate and excited about what you do every day, maybe it's time we look at something else to do, because without that, it is so difficult to get the students excited about what we are doing. The motivating educator is going to interact with clarity. Educators need to be able to translate their experiences into a very clear and understandable information for students. Again, a lot of the things that we just take for granted that is so easy for us to do because we've been doing it for so long is brand new to them. So clarifying and explaining details, our verbal expression, our articulation, being well-organized, having well-organized classroom delivery is going to contribute to this clarity. Being able to field questions and address inquiries. And if you don't know, it's okay to say, hey, I'm not sure about this, but then you find the information and you take it back to the student. Most students are motivated to attend classes that hold their attention and make them feel like their time is well spent. I want you to recognize that they are giving up an hour or so of their life every day to be in your classroom as well. So now we've taken a look at what motivates our students and what characteristics we as educators need to possess. How can we utilize this information? So a couple ideas on taking this to the classroom, just a couple of activities that you can do. First of all, if a student is unclear about their personal motivation levels, have them research a little bit. The Internet offers so many opportunities for self-assessment tools in these areas. You might ask a student to conduct searches on ideas like self-concept, self-esteem, attitude, self-control, self-efficacy. Have them research some of these information to find out where they are. And then following the completion of an assessment such as this, have the student or help the student set goals based on their results of their finding. Remind students that these types of inventories, personal inventories, are guidelines only, and the results should be considered with judgment. So it's not, just always black and white. It's just for them to understand who they are, where their self-esteem is, where their self-concept. So have them do a little bit of additional research on that. We can help them identify motivating factors. Ask the students, this is a great activity to do on the first day of school, the first day of class, the first time they come into your classroom. Ask the student to write a brief summary of their goals and the reason that they are in your classroom. Review the course objectives with them and ask the student to complete their written summary by writing ways in which they can use your class content to support their goals. It's important that they make the connection between what you are teaching them and what they are learning and what their goals are. That's what is critical, that they make that connection. So this activity can create rapport in the classroom as well as provide innovative ideas. To reinforce your involvement with students, keep notes of the information that they present during this activity, and then you can refer back to it later when coaching them throughout the class. Provide reinforcement, again, positive reinforcement. Find something positive to say about each assignment that they hand in, every mannequin head that they work on, every client that they work on, what you liked about it, what they can do to improve. This is so key. Let students know what they have done positively can be one of the biggest success motivators that can lead to improvement. Remember, what gets praised and acknowledged gets repeated. Let's look at a couple of reasons for a lack of motivation. We can all describe both the motivated and the allegedly unmotivated student, and let's be honest, we probably have strong opinions about both types of students. There are situations in which students may truly be unmotivated, as well as when students appear to be unmotivated but are actually facing other issues. Remember all those issues that we talked about first thing? may be involved in their life and really have nothing to do with being unmotivated. So when we think about a motivated individual, we think about a student that is regular, punctual in attendance, they have active participation, the timely submission of the assignments. As we discussed earlier, motivation springs from a variety of internal and external sources. Typically, the student who is motivated has an interest in the material, and they see the relationship between the goals, their personal goals, and the course content itself. Therefore, they feel connected to the course and to other people in the class, so they can make that connection. Students who are not motivated, on the other hand, we would describe them as chronic tardy, absent, lack of participation, lack of attention, minimal communication with the instructor. A lot of times we just perceive them as having a negative attitude. The unmotivated student's overall performance may be at a lower level than the other members of the class. There are even times when a student truly lacks motivation for a particular portion of the course. So let's look at a couple of reasons why our students demonstrate lack of motivation. First of all, the class is required and the student lacks interest in the subject. Let's face it, throughout the program, some of our students are not going to be interested in all the subjects because, they're not making the connection. I just really want to do hair. I just want to do facials. That's what I want to do. I don't understand what chemistry or anatomy has to do with any of this, and so they might lose interest in those subjects. And students have a difficult time getting motivated about some of those subjects. Let's face it, how about you as an educator? I imagine that some of us, I know there's classes I teach that I have a hard time getting motivated about or getting excited about because it's not my favorite subject. So that might be a reason for lack of motivation. Sometimes the student enrolls in school but then decides at midpoint to take another route. They might go ahead and stay through the program to complete it, but they've really lost interest or they decided they wanted to do something else. And whether it's decision to do hair, not do hair, maybe move into facials or nails, their motivation may decline in your class. So that might be another reason that students have a lack of motivation. We at all times have situations in our personal lives that affect our levels of motivation. Our students also have these personal situations taking place. I think that's really important to keep in mind. It's important that we identify those situations that may be taking place in our students' life and how this affects their motivational level. So let's take a look at some of those. We quickly mentioned some of them already, but let's take another look. Family responsibilities. Adult students are frequently parents caring for young children of their own. They have concerns such as illness, marital issues, daily responsibilities that take precedence over school. Thoughts and feelings may cause a student to appear uninterested in class and may affect attendance. For single parents, the demand can be overwhelming. Again, I'm not excusing this. I'm just making sure you guys understand that a student being unmotivated oftentimes have other issues going on and not just about school, not just about your class. They oftentimes have employment responsibilities. Most of them have to work to be able to support themselves, maybe to pay their tuition. For many students, working while attending school is a necessity and provides for the basic essentials that we talked about earlier. If a student needs to choose between employment and school, employment is going to win based on realistic demands. Then there's anxiety. Adult students who are in school for the first time, or some of our students are returning to school after a long absence, or they had a very bad experience at the last school that they went to, they're going to have anxieties in place, whether it's anxieties with an instructor who treated them poorly, or it may be about their test-taking ability, maybe doubts about specific skills, or just general fears of not performing well. They may also have fear that the responses and the possible rejection of family and friends. That's important to remember, is that not everybody is going to support them in their decision to go to cosmetology school. And therefore, there's a certain level of apprehension that can be projected and therefore perceived by us as lack of motivation. There's situations that require referral. Sometimes students have conditions such as depression or severe anxiety substance abuse that requires attention from other resources that are equipped to handle these problems. I want to make it very clear, it is not your job as an instructor to give them advice on these type of issues. That is not our expertise. That is not what we do. It is your role to refer them to other agencies that can help them out with those types of situations. And, of course, there's cultural differences. Here in the Western society, motivation is equated with a very bright, exuberant energy, expressive, high level of energy, and that is what we consider as very motivating. Now, recognize that sometimes you have people from other cultures in your school, and that mentality in itself may not be true. So some individuals from other cultures may express their motivation and enthusiasm in a different way. It may not be as exuberant as what we here in the United States might do. The wonderful news about all of this that we're talking about is that there's actual techniques that we can bring into our classrooms that will have a direct effect on our students' level of motivation that they demonstrate on a daily basis. So let's take a look at what can we do. First of all, become aware of your students' needs. Every classroom session offers us an opportunity to learn more about the needs of our students. It's important that you document those students' needs, jot down notes when the student talks about information they need or expect. Get feedback from them. Check in with them. Just check in with the student periodically during class to assess, are their needs being met? Take a few moments and ask the class as a whole, is the pace too fast? Is it too slow? Is it just right? Is the material making sense? Perhaps they need a break. When the students are working on assignments in class, go around the classroom and ask individuals how they are doing. So just constantly being aware, assessing their behavior, noticing when their behavior doesn't match their needs, and be aware. That's the best way I can summarize that one. The second bullet you see there is align course objectives with the students' needs and desires. As we learn more about our students' needs and desires, we can try to align our class and our objectives of our class more closely with the students' goals. Relate the content to the workplace. Always share with your student how the information you're teaching them is going to apply in the, I don't really care for this term, but the real world environment, how it's going to impact their future. Students need to know what's in it for me, and how it impacts their future is critical. So relate it to the workplace and share your personal experiences from the workplace as it relates to our industry. Relate information to students' lives. Tell them when you think a class objective is in line with some of the students' needs and desires. Make it personal to them. Provide them options. Ask students to make a choice among several activities and projects, and by getting their input, you will be more likely to align the course assignments to meet their needs. Provide students with a sense of progress and competence. Since students need to feel that their effort is making a contribution to their knowledge, it's important to offer opportunities for success and mastery. We can do that by acknowledging successes. Ask a student who did well on a project to share their success tips with the classroom in an informal discussion format. Acknowledge them in front of everybody, and then ask them to share how they did it. Acknowledge their progress. Assign a project that has critical tasks, and at the completion of each task, take a moment and praise them and acknowledge their completion of that task as it relates to the next task. Provide opportunities for feedback. Incorporate more quizzes into what you're doing to cover smaller amounts of material. Instead of just testing them on the very last of the chapter, on the full chapter, find ways to review that information more frequently to get better feedback from them. And align the instructor behavior with the perspectives, attitudes, and language of the student. Educators who can relate and communicate effectively with the students will see more motivation. Although it's not always possible to align your behavior with students' attitudes, sometimes we don't want to do that. Sometimes it is beneficial for us to do that. Make examples relevant to them. Use pop culture examples in your classroom. use items that are going to relate to them, whether it's movies or popular music, maybe television, text languaging, whatever works. Make it user-friendly to them. Use the student language. Use phrases that the students are likely to use. What are the praise words that they are using? Find out what that is and start using with that. They'll get a kick out of it, you doing that with them. And then use analogies related to students and their careers. Your analogies, your stories need to resonate with the student during your lecture. So find ways to always align with them and what they have going on at the time. A couple other ways that we can do this is to offer stimulation in a variety of ways. This is basically varying the stimuli in your class. It's so critical that we learn to do more than just stand up in front of a classroom and lecture. We need to vary the classroom format to include group discussion, stand up and find a partner and discuss something, panels, role-playing, field trips, videos, research assignments. Different teaching methods are going to go a long way in motivating your students. Use all the senses. Appeal to all of their senses, whether it's visual, auditory, the kinesthetic approach to teaching. Incorporate games that is going to get them to solve problems creatively. Change your body language. It's important that you use your body language, your tone of voice to move around the classroom and change the classroom environment in some way. Incorporate physical activity. Get them up. Do an energizer. Get them just stand and stretch if that's what it takes. And then just assess them. Watch for signs of fatigue and distractions. And if you feel that you're losing them all, it's important that you stand them up and move around, change an activity, vary the stimuli of some sort. The more prepared you are, the better and more easily you're going to be able to vary the stimuli in your class. Provide positive reinforcement. Are you tired of that one yet? I can't say it enough. Provide positive reinforcement, particularly towards the end of the class session. Take a few minutes at the end of the class and summarize what worked really well about that class, or get them to share what they really enjoyed about that class today. Maybe that's one of the ways you wrap up the class. Tell me one thing that you really loved about today's class, and get them to share that positive reinforcement for the classroom itself. Help students feel competent and confident with the course material. Educators who provide students with a sense of accomplishments and confidence is going to always find their job easier. And allow enough time at the end of the class sessions for summarization. It's important that we always wrap up a class, that we don't just end with our last concept. It's important that we summarize and do a quick review, and that will help us build into anticipation for the next class. So these are all motivational techniques, but what do we do with them? How do we utilize this information for our classroom setting? I've got a couple ideas on how to take it to the classroom. First of all, use some sort of a progress assessment tool. Create a tool that the students can complete on their own to track their progress within your class. All right? I know we do grades and we take tests and various things like that, but consider some sort of form where they can track their completion of assignments, their assessment, a personal assessment. In the Student Salon, we do this through tracking forms where they track their clients, they track their numbers. Find a way to use some sort of assessment tool in your classroom as well. Meet the individual needs of our students. Ask the students. I think every class at the beginning, when you move into a new subject, you should begin with asking the students, what do they want to learn out of this? What interests them about this subject? What do they want to get out of today's class? If we started every class like that and wrote them down on the flip chart or the marker board, that way as we're progressing through the class, we can make sure that we are meeting their individual needs. Use student-designed activities. I love this idea. Divide your class into small groups and have give each group one concept of what the subject is that you're teaching, and then have them come up with a learning activity that group will come up with a learning activity to deliver that concept, and then ask that group to teach their concept to the entire class. It's a way to totally get them involved and use student-designed activities. Make it relevant to the student. For concepts and themes that you are addressing in your class, ask students to volunteer examples or stories that are relevant to them. When they do this, make copies of them, write them down, and then you could make a list of them and distribute it to everybody in the classroom. And then they all have these examples to help them reinforce what learning that they're doing. A recognition box, I think, is a great idea. Although it's important that we provide praise to our students, it's even greater if our students learn to acknowledge each other. If your students are reserved about giving each other praise and positive feedback in a classroom, do this recognition box to where students can write down and a positive, make sure that they understand it has to be positive. It can't be anything negative, but write down some positive means of acknowledging their peers. At our company here at Milady, we have what we call Bravo recognitions, and we have basically a tool that allows us to go in and acknowledge one of our coworkers when they do something amazing. And it's just a great way to build motivation on our team. And the same would work for your students in the classroom, allowing them to recognize each other. It can be anonymous or not, whatever they want to do, and then you read the contents of the box at designated times. Now, again, if it's something negative, just throw it away, and we don't even recognize that. Use end-of-class summaries at the end of every class session. Ask the students to write down a couple of sentences about what you covered in class, what stood out, what was the value to them. Collect those papers and read each one in a way of summarizing the entire class, and give as much positive reinforcement as possible for students when they share something. Maybe not even write it down. Just go through the room and ask each student to share what was the value of today's class, getting them involved. A workplace scavenger hunt is basically for a topic you're covering in class. Send small groups of students on a scavenger hunt for information on how the topic that you're teaching in class will impact them in the workplace. Okay, so have them, especially when you get into concepts that are a little bit distant to them, such as your sciences or maybe some of the hairstyling techniques like finger waves, pin curls, have them do a little bit of research or a scavenger hunt of some sort on how that content is going to be used in the workplace. Put a time limit on it that they have to come back by this certain time and reconvene in the class and share their findings with their fellow students. And then, of course, sharing our personal experiences. We need to share our personal, not our personal life, let's clarify that, but our personal experiences from the salon, and we need to ask our students to do the same type of thing in relationship to the content of the class, not just any story we want to share, but specifically as it relates to the material that we were covering. If the students can relate their past experiences to the current materials, it is going to be able to help motivate them as well. Now, despite all of our efforts and our positive intentions to motivate a particular student, problems may continue to occur. In this case, discuss your concerns with the student. There may be an issue that needs to be addressed, or maybe this is just not the right time for the student to be pursuing education. But it's important that we talk to them. And we do this when we're talking to the students. Be empathetic, okay? Maintain a supportive and concerned approach to the student. Approach the situation with the idea that a positive outcome is possible. Doing so will leave the opportunity open for a solution as well as result in one more positive interaction. Ask the student directly about outside responsibilities and concerns and whether or not they are interfering with their school participation. And then we must listen carefully to our students' responses and figure out how we can offer our help and support. Offer other resources. If a student is having trouble with if they're having trouble with something outside of the school, outside of the class, Work on a plan to help them address this situation. And again, refer them to other resources as needed. It's not your job to always to solve every one of their problems. Sometimes your responsibility is just a matter of referring them to another agency. Always follow your school's policies on this. Make sure you're following your school protocol at all times, and do what the school is recommending you do in different circumstances like that. Be flexible. Be flexible, be flexible, be flexible. One of my absolute all-time favorite quotes says, "Blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape." Remember, adult learners have outside responsibility and obligations, and we need to set flexible guidelines that allow that are going to hold the students individually accountable, but also complying with school's policy. Now, I'm not saying that we just let the student have a free-for-all and do whatever they want, but we need to recognize that sometimes things do happen. For example, tardiness. Now, if a student is everyday tardy, that's a different situation. If a student is always on time and then one day they are late and it's because of a blowout on their car or something happened, that's where I'm talking about being flexible. But always, you guys, within your school's policies. Always follow your school's policies on this. Keep records and documentation. This is just a little bit of CYA is what we're talking about here. Anytime you meet with a student where you are addressing a serious issue like this, you need to document it, put it in your file, put it in their permanent file, whatever that is, however your school asks that you do that, that's what we want to do, all right? So we do have some problematic students, the student who doesn't want to participate, the know-it-all, the belligerent student. So how do we deal with that? We're going to do a quick review of a couple of these things, and then we will wrap up this call. So let's take a look at dealing with some problematic students. So a student with low self-esteem. Here's a couple ideas for you. First of all, learn and use their name. Every student that enters in your classroom, acknowledge them by name. Dale Carnegie said the sound of a person's name is the sweetest sound on earth. So call them by name. Get to know them. Spend time getting to know the student. What are their dreams? What are their interests? What is it that made them decide to come to school? And the more you know about that, the more you can hold them accountable to what's going on and help build their self-esteem. Provide success situations. Basically, start the student on a task at which they can be successful. Build their self-esteem by giving them small things that they can be successful at, and as they become successful at those, increase the difficulty of the task, and the student's confidence is going to increase as well. Use positive reinforcement. Every student wants to hear that positive reinforcement. I like what you said about this. You did this really well. Find something positive in the student's behavior. I've noticed that you always come to class smiling. Thank you. And leave it at that. As you acknowledge them for some of these things, it will help build their self-esteem. Then there's the challenge of the student who does not participate. This situation, the student tends to sit back in the class, remain quiet, even in the liveliest of conversations. They're isolated from other class members. Lack of participation can be a result of a low self-esteem or a shyness, or sometimes it is attitude. So first of all, talk to the student. Make an appointment outside the classroom and talk about their level of participation. Why is it that they're not participating? The underlying cause will give you clues about how to deal with the issue. From that, make a plan. With the student's input, devise a plan on how to build their comfort level in participating in the classroom. A couple of ways to do this is, instead of having them participate in the large group, put them into smaller groups. Divide your class into smaller groups of 5, and they might be more likely to discuss within the smaller group versus the big group. And as they become more confident, then they will get involved in the other big classroom discussions as well. Rearrange the classroom environment. Rearrange the environment to where they can't sit in the back of the room because there is no back of the room. Whatever you do, your class size, the class environment is going to depend on this, but change up the classroom. Get them involved, okay? Get the student involved. Ask them to participate in a non-threatening task. If they're very shy, instead of asking them to answer a question or to share their thoughts on something, maybe you ask them to hand out the next handout that you're going to use, or maybe you have them come up and write on the marker board for you. Get them involved in a very non-threatening way. And provide activity signals or cues. Give the student, this is something you'd set up with them ahead of time, give them cues that you're going to invite them to contribute their thoughts or feelings so that they know it's coming and that they can be prepared, and it's not a last minute, I don't know what to say, just kind of wink at them, something like that, to let them know that you're going to be sharing with them. Then we have the student who knows everything. We don't have too many of these, but the student who comes in and they just basically challenge your authority. They answer every question without allowing anybody else to answer. They negate what other students are saying. They basically want to brush ahead of the entire class. Meet the student's needs positively. Recognize the student's strengths and put the student in charge of leading a class or an activity, with the understanding that they have valuable information to share. So use them to your advantage, okay? Get them involved. Ask them, hey, you've got a really great concept of this. Would you be willing to spend about 3 minutes in class telling the students about this concept? Challenge them more. If a student is truly advanced, create additional assignments and add components to the already existing assignments to challenge them. You got a really good handle on this. Let's challenge you a little bit more and see what happens. Ask them for sources. If they are constantly interrupting you in class and they're contradicting your information, ask them where that source was. Where did they get that information? Where does that knowledge come from? And then sometimes you got to just sit down and confront them about this. Now, we don't do this in the classroom. We do it outside of the classroom. We have a frank conversation with them, explain that you would like to address this situation positively and work together with them, but explain to them how they're always interrupting and always knowing everything is making a problem for the rest of the class. Student who rambles on about a subject. Establish boundaries for this student. Explain to the student that everyone is allowed a designated number of minutes for sharing, and once they've used their minutes, then they're done sharing about it. Structure the class to where they can talk at certain times and not just throughout the class. Ask them to write their questions down. Or I love this one. Use a physical prop. Consider using a prop. Give them a designated number of paper clips or any other objects, maybe bobby pins, and every time they contribute, they have to return one of the paper clips or bobby pins to you, and when they're out, they can't talk in class anymore. So it's kind of a fun way to look at that to help them learn that. And establish a system of communication with the student. If in-class techniques fail to address the issue, speak to the student individually outside of the classroom. Devise communication method that will indicate to the student that it's time to give somebody else a chance to talk. For example, you might rub your forehead when the student is talking, and they should recognize that as time to move on. And so that's working it out with them ahead of time to help them out without embarrassing them in front of the entire classroom. And then finally, the student who is belligerent. This is the student who is argumentative, hostile, rude to you, to other students. They're disruptive. They're unwilling to participate. Belligerence can stem from a variety of sources, including insecurity, anger that may or may not be directed at you, and other issues. So when dealing with a student who's belligerent, try to determine whether they are, what are the underlying issues. And then we start with reinforcing positive behavior. Make an effort to compliment when they are not acting belligerently, okay? Remember, what gets praised and recognized. If we just remove the word praise, what gets recognized gets repeated. So a lot of times a student who is belligerent is just doing so for the attention. And so if we just learn to ignore that behavior, it will stop. And then they'll recognize that when they do things positively or when they're not acting belligerently, that we recognize them, and that might start to shift it. Pull them aside and address the topic of belligerence. You could actually do this as a classroom discussion as well, not against that specific student, but have them address the topic of, argumentative, maybe clients. Do it from a client perspective, a hostile client, rude client. Have them address how that is going to impact them and how it impacts the class. Invite students to address the issue. Engage them in a discussion about how it impacts their education. and encourage assertive, not aggressive behavior. So encourage assertive behavior. Perhaps compliment the student for taking a stand on expressing their opinion, but explain that you are more open to assertive actions that do not include aggressive remarks, tones, or facial expressions. Okay? Consider comparing and contrasting aggressive behavior with assertive behavior. Make sure that they know the difference between the two and recognize that we're good with being assertive. We just don't want you to be aggressive. So today we have reviewed the impact that the role each of us plays as an educator in the process of motivating our students from internal and external motivating factors that affect the adult learners. We've discussed techniques that we can use to increase student motivation levels within our classroom by implementing activities and procedures that will contribute to a favorable learning environment. So in conclusion, the master educator who learns to balance each of these roles effectively is going to be rewarded with positive and stimulating experiences with our learners in the classroom. We will strive to develop and maintain high levels of student motivation and interest in an effort to minimize disciplinary challenges that we may face within the classroom. So I'd like to leave you with this final quote. Henry Brooks Adams said, "A teacher affects eternity. They can never tell where their influences stop." And I just want you to keep that in mind every day when you step into that classroom. You have no idea where your influence is going to stop. You may have the next Vidal Sassoon or, Martin Parsons in your classroom. You just never know. So I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar today. If you are interested in more information about this particular class, you can go to our faculty development online classes, and this information was pulled from the Classroom Management for the Adult Learner. So feel free to check that out, and thank you all for attending. Our next webinar will be scheduled for September the 15th, Customer Service for Optimum Retention. As always, be sure to check us out on Facebook. Go to www.milady.cengage.com and view a calendar of events. And if you had some colleagues that didn't get to participate in this today, this class will be available on our website within a few weeks. Okay, so look for it there. In the meantime, go out and make it a great week. Motivate your students, change some lives. Have a great day.